I would say the biggest conversation that we have is the legality around paying your children. A lot of people see it as like, oh my goodness, you're going to go to IRS tax jail. This is a loophole that people have used for years. And it's not even a loophole, it is legitimate work that your children are completing. And in my mind, it's unfair to not compensate them for that with the plan that it's going to advance them for the future. I'm not going to pay my children $200 a month to go and, blow at the toy store, but I will pay my children $200 a month to build that generational wealth so that they are in a position that when they do need it, it's there. And it took a very small contribution on my part, in the grand scheme of things when you look at it, compared to if they had to come up with that money on their own or pay that money to a bank. I think the biggest thing is that communication piece. So many of us were bitter about something, but we don't ever want to speak up and say how we actually feel. Whether that is voicing that to your husband, whether it's voicing it to the members that are involved in the farming, there's a chance they don't even know that you feel that way. And so it's really not fair to put it onto them that they aren't, you know, giving you what you feel you need out of the situation when they don't even know what that need is, kind of that expectation that you can't fulfill.
Welcome to the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Fraze, Farm Family Coach, here with another episode full of transition tips, tactics, and sometimes hard truths to get harmony on your farm. Hey folks, it's Elaine Fraze, Farm Family Coach, welcoming you to another episode number 64, with a new guest that I'm just starting to meet, Jenny Weg. And Jenny is from Iowa, has a farm, has 3 beautiful girls, and a husband that she farms with, and also does other digital work remotely. But the reason I've asked Jenny to come as a guest today is because of her work around finances. And we've entitled this webinar podcast today, How to Stop Feeding Your Adult Child's Entitlement. So Jenny, tell people how you and I first met.
Yeah, the first time I met Elaine was actually, I want to say it was 1 year ago. You had spoke at a conference for Farm Credit Services, and I was there speaking on a panel, and I happened to sit in on your keynote session, and I took so much away from that. And it just so happened that you were going to be coming back to the area a month later to the Prairie Family Business Association. And I recruited my dad, my brother, and my uncle who were part of the farming. And I was like, I don't care what you guys are doing on this day. I'm paying. You're going to go and you're going to sit through this session with Elaine because I feel like it was just something. Farm succession planning was nothing we had ever really discussed before. And it wasn't because there was bad blood or things, it just never came up. I mean, it wasn't something we made time for. It was just kind of a wait and see how things go. But I knew we needed to have these conversations. We had had an instance just 2 years prior to that that my dad had gotten really sick. And we saw the implications of he was in a coma in the hospital for 15 days. We didn't know if he was going to wake up. And we realized how unprepared we were for something like that to happen. So it's just started the conversations. But it was just kind of breaking the ice for that first discussion to happen.
So Jenny, how do you label yourself on Instagram? How would people find you on your socials?
I am the Faithful Farming Family on Instagram and on Facebook.
And faithful is part of your walk with God and how faith interacts with basically the foundation for your life and how you show up as a person in this world and also how you do your farming. But I think the other piece that I want to hone in on today, because we called this stop feeding your adult child's entitlement, is what are the financial practices that you and your husband are doing, along with the conversations that you've had with your parents and your brother around succession? Just tell our audience, what are the key things that you want young families in farming to know about the importance of financial planning? What does that look like in practice to you?
Yeah, so for us, just being incredibly conservative, our descendant background is Dutch. And so my
Okay.
husband's very Dutch. And there's actually kind of a similar area that, when you're Dutch, you are going to be extremely conservative with your finances. Me personally, I have no problem spending money. My husband's definitely more on the conservative side. So trying to find a way to balance those two things has been really important on both our personal and on the farm side of things. So for us personally, my husband and I have been married for 10 years. We really tried to tackle all of our personal debt, get all of that out of the way. And now that farming has come into our lives, we realize there's going to be debt that we have to carry with that, but just doing it in a very smart and strategic way so that we don't overextend ourselves and so that we can be there to prepare not only ourselves, but the next generation and set them up properly for when it's time for them to take over.
And you're doing this as a long game.
Yes, this is a very long game. So the long game kind of started for us. One thing that I really wanted to focus on, something that I felt like I could control on I can't control the interest rates. I can't control a lot of things, but what I could control is saving for my kids very early in life. And
Yes.
so I don't know whatever sparked me into doing this, but I just kind of became this finance nerd. And I started learning more things about the tax code, and I started learning how I could pay my kids as employees, because my children are very active on the farm. And for so long, we would give them $5 for helping with livestock chores, or you tagged along in the tractor all day today, and you were handing me parts, and you were helping out. Here's $10, go buy a toy at the store. And when we started looking at it as, they're legitimate helpers of our business, and that they deserve to be compensated for that. They're also a very large part of my social media and what I do on social media. So paying them for being a part of that
Mm.
content and giving them a better start so that when the time comes, they have retirement set aside, they have things that are built up for them, so that hopefully that's not a concern that they have in if they would like to take over the family farm. I don't ever want to force them to take things over, but I also don't want finances to be the reason that they can't.
Well, the interesting thing that's beautiful about what you're doing is when we say the long game is that 60 years of compounding, right? Of putting money aside for their well-being and also money that they could leverage when they're in their mid-20s or early 30s to help them. And who knows what's farming is going to look like 10 or 15 years from now. How old are your children today?
So my girls are very young. My oldest is 8, then I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. They are not paid on a fluid scale. They each have their own amounts that they earn. They have age appropriate jobs that they earn money off of. Um, in the United States, we have certain tax laws and tax codes to where kids can earn up to X amount of money per year before they're taxed on it, and that money can be invested into a Roth IRA, and that's tax-free going in and tax-free going out for them because they don't have to pay that tax on their income. Normally, you pay your tax up front on a Roth IRA, but because they're within those earning limits, they don't have to pay that. Um,
And that,
None of my kids get that max amount by any means,
oh,
but it's just, $200 a month for what they're doing around the farm can grow exponentially over the next 60 years for them.
that's $2,400 a year, folks, in
It's
US dollars. Yes, which is 1.39 bigger than it is in Canada. And in Canada, we have tax-free savings accounts that farm families can contribute to for well-being, and registered education savings plans, RESPs. So I think what I like about the way you think, Jenny, is the word save, according to David Chilton, who's the author of The Wealthy Barber. He says the next generation or younger generation families typically don't have two words in their vocabulary. One is save, and the second is wait. And so you can't just sit around waiting for your money to grow without having a way of wanting to do it, right? So I think that it's important that everyone understands that you do have capacity to earn on a farm. And what you are doing with your family is you're also what I would call building the personal wealth bubble, not just of you and your husband, but also for your children. Where do you see the seeds of angst or conflict being sown, Jenny, when it comes to people feeling entitled that just because I grew up on this farm in Iowa, I deserve to get a quarter of it? So you mentioned in another podcast that what I said about, fairness is helping everyone be successful, but fair and equal are not part of the vocabulary anymore. So, where do you see entitlement being an issue, even in young children and as that grows to adults?
Yeah, so without a doubt, I'm actually one of 5 children. And of those children, I am actively row crop farming. My brother has had a role in the past. He's taking some time off from farming. And then I have a sister who's actually heavily involved in the livestock aspect of it. My family also raises sheep. And so we all kind of have our little niches of where we fit. And then I have one sister who's completely moved off the farm and doesn't have a whole lot to do with the farming at all. So just kind of taking a look at that and knowing that the amount of time, the sweat equity, will you, that's so hard to measure in dollar amount of what you invest into that farm, year after year after year is going to be weighted differently than what somebody who has moved off the farm and has absolutely no connection to the farm anymore.
So, when you had these discussions after your dad was so sick during COVID and almost could have died, and started talking about what the expectations were, what did those conversations sound like?
So, my dad actually went and he met with a financial advisor just to talk about different options. I think you can learn so much about how other families structure things and just kind of expand your own thinking of how things could potentially look like in the future. I don't think that anybody is entitled to just have things given to them. I think it is something you have to earn and it's something you have to want. Um, it's when you look at it from the outside looking in, you'd look crazy to wanna sign up for this kind of a life, and so when you do put your life on hold to hold that legacy, and to really grow it into something for the future generations, I feel like that is something that has to be acknowledged in a different way.
And that's a tough conversation because no matter how many children you have, I'm the oldest of 5, and, everybody has different money scripts, I call them. Some are savers, some are spenders, and you've already talked about that a little bit. And some people's expectations are just not workable. The other thing I would like the audience to hear is was recently at another conference in Iowa and in Ankeny, Jenny, just outside of Des Moines, with beginning farmers from Iowa State University, with their conference. And a man at lunch said, "Well, Elaine, I have 2 children. They're each making $300,000 US a year, and they're never coming back to the farm." I'm going, wow, that makes things a little bit interesting, doesn't it? Especially if this man doesn't have a successor for the farm and then he becomes a landlord. And I sort of planted the seed of an idea of how would you like to adopt somebody who's non-family and be in a non-related partnership. But for you, Jenny, you're 5th generation, if I'm not mistaken, and you've got your 3 daughters who join you sometimes in the tractor or other things that you're doing in your row cropping expectation. And I also heard on a podcast that you were only a few days postpartum when it was harvest, and you found out that having a newborn in the tractor with you was probably the best scenario, right? For how you're going to continue on, and you can take flack for that, but that was what you chose to do and that's where you were needed and that's how you showed up. So when do young farm families who are listening to this, when should they get a financial planner? Your dad went to a financial planner to get more options. What do you think is the advantage of having a financial planner as a young farm family to help give you options for building personal wealth?
Well, I definitely would not advise waiting until somebody is in a hospital bed and you're forced up against the wall to do it. That was our wake up call for it, and
Mm,
we wish we would have done it sooner. We got a second chance at this. And so, between dad kind of getting it set up on his own, I've reached out for other resources like attending your uh, seminar that you had hosted in Sioux Falls that day. It was so helpful just to start that conversation. And also realizing too, a lot of ours is kind of tricky because my dad is one of 5 children as well. So I have several aunts and uncles who own ground, who own corporations, and that I work really, really well with. The tricky part comes when the next generation, I have cousins. I
yeah.
don't bad relationships with cousins, but there's also not the same level of understanding of the farm, and there's not the same level of loyalty. I'm not my aunts and uncles' children, and it's just something we'll have to figure out as we come. But when we're making these large decisions right now that alter our life in 5, 10, 15 years, we have to take all of those things into consideration.
And I think you've just hit another nail, or what I would call undiscussable. I have my bull with me all at all times. But it's the aunts and uncles and the cousins. And in family business, and farms are family businesses, brothers can farm well together, sisters can farm well together. But once it comes down to those cousins getting to be your age, Jenny, and being in their early 30s and having children of their own, there's a dilution, and there's also an expectation that I'm willing to work hard for my parents because the wealth will typically cascade down to that family part of the family tree. But I'm a little bit upset with my cousin who's not pulling his weight at all, who thinks he gets a half or a quarter of everything just because he's in the family tree. And so these are wealth conversations that are interesting to have. What kinds of questions are you getting on your social media accounts when you do your financial teaching through your Instagram account?
I would say the biggest conversation that we have is the legality around paying your children. A lot of
Mm,
people see it as like, oh my goodness, you're going to go to IRS tax jail. This is a loophole that people have used for years. And it's not even a loophole, it is legitimate work that your children are completing. And in my mind, it's unfair to not compensate them for that with the plan that it's going to advance them for the future. I'm not going to pay my children $200 a month to go and, blow at the toy store, but I will pay my children $200 a month to build that generational wealth so that they are in a position that when they do need it, it's there. And it took a very small contribution on my part, in the grand scheme of things when you look at it, compared to if they had to come up with that money on their own or pay that money to a bank.
Another question I have for you is, I heard that your husband likes to bake while you like to be at the computer doing the budgeting.
He
And
does.
I think that's, and he makes apparently very good chocolate chip cookies, so I'll give you my address and he can mail some up here. Um, so the budgeting thing, Jenny, this is another, my degree is in home economics, 1978. So I graduated a long time ago and became an extension county home economist with the Department of Agriculture in the town of Boisvene, and then fell in love with the local farmer. And here I am 40 some years later. I think 48 or 9 years later now. Anyway, all of this to say, I believe very strongly that happy families know where their money is going, and they don't, like you say, overspend, and they take care of personal debt quickly so that they can get to the good debt, which is growing your farm business. So tell me how you use family budgeting to help you get a really good handle on what you're using for family living.
Yeah, we do not use any farming income for ourselves. That's something that we feel very strongly about just because we do have such flexible off farm jobs that we can use for our personal finances right now. And aside from that, we live very conservatively, very simply. We just purchased a new minivan that is 9 years old that has 100,000 miles on it. My husband works
New
on
to
our
you, new
and
to
we
you.
didn't take out a loan to do that. So just being able to free up as much of our personal income that we don't feel like we have to take an income from the farm so we can be in this kind of growth mode of investing back into the farm, of investing in equipment, of looking at what it looks like to, purchase corporation shares, whatever that is going forward, just so that we're in a really strong financial position when those opportunities come. Because you never know when those opportunities are going to come.
Have
All
you
of
been have you been sorry, have you been promised the ability or opportunity to purchase shares at some definite time in the future?
So it's just a conversation that we've just started to have.
Okay.
As far as things that are through my parents directly, I think that opportunity is there 100%. I have good relationships with the other people as well. But like I said, it's just kind of at the beginning stages. But just getting that conversation started is the hardest part. And I don't even know what the intimidation of it is. Like I said, we have great relationships with those people, but it's just kind of that elephant in the room that you just don't want to bring up. And I think at the root of it all, what really helped me change my mindset into bringing it up is there's a way to do things that benefits everybody involved. Even if a cousin 20 years down the road says, you know what, I'm ready to sell, I want to sell out of my ground, them taking a lump sum payment is not beneficial for them either when it comes to
No.
taxes. So looking at saying, like, hey, what are the lease to own options here? What could we do that would keep this ground in the family? Is that something that's important to you? That was one question I had to ask because we might not all have the same goal here, and that's okay, but it needs to be communicated and vocalized that we don't have that same goal. I
Well,
think that's
and also your aunts and uncles need to know what good savers you and your husband are in terms of being prepared for an opportunity. And I think that's the other thing. I also heard you say that you get your groceries delivered to your house to save
yes.
you time and at a cost that, I don't know, whatever your Walmart annual fee is for that to happen. We have co-op stores here in our little small towns, and so that's where a lot of the grocery shopping happens. But I do know that my daughter-in-law doesn't mind the hack that she uses sometimes in a larger city to do click and collect, I think it's called, and just get her
Yeah.
groceries dumped in the back of her vehicle and off she goes without having to go shopping in the store. Anyway, whatever workarounds you have used, I think it's really important what you just said, Jenny, for people to listen to, that if your desire is to have a stake in the farm business, what are you, as a young couple, willing to work towards to be able to take advantage of a buyout opportunity? And that buyout opportunity may come in the form of shares in a corporation that uncles are selling or cousins are selling or siblings are selling or parents are selling. Or the buyout opportunity may come out in what you said in terms of a lease agreement with ground that is shifting in ownership. And I think that's where when David Chilton talked about waiting, is you and your husband are willing to wait for an opportunity, but you're not willing to wait without having a plan in place to activate that opportunity, which means you're building cash reserves or investments or some way of using your off-farm income to take care of your family, but also to be wise in not spending money on assets that depreciate quickly, like a minivan.
Mhm.
So good on you for buying a new to you van that's already paid for in cash.
Yes. And that was
And
just
you
a
use the, sorry,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. That
I
was a
said,
big
you also,
you can go ahead, Elaine.
okay, sorry. No, you also use the word conservative, and I'm just curious why you don't say the word frugal. What's wrong with being frugal? I think frugal is good stewardship, but maybe conservative is a softer way of saying you know where your money goes and you use your money wisely for family
Yeah.
living.
And that's just a word that we use. I mean, I have no beef with the word frugal. We definitely are frugal. I'd even call my husband cheap, to be 100% honest. But
Or tight, we might say.
very tight, very tight. But just knowing that, yeah, like you said, having that stake there and having it available when or if the conversation arises is so important. We've kind of this is a big pivotal year for us. For the past 6 years, I've helped on the farm. For the past 3 years, I've farmed a quarter of land. And then this year is where we're going to be taking over a lot more of the ground. Our next big
Wow.
shift will be in 3 years when three, four, five, I mean, everything is relevant with time
It's
on
in a
farm.
timeline, though.
But
Mhm.
when my dad is ready to retire, that will be our next shift. So just knowing whatever we can do in this amount of time to build that equity, and to allow those cash reserves to open up for when the opportunity
Mhm.
presents itself.
Yeah. And obviously, your dad and mom have had conversations to put those timelines in place. So your dad has put a pin in the calendar. Is it for 2029? What's his year when he's probably going to step back without stepping away?
Yep. So his goal is 3 years. So this would be the start of the third to the last season, I guess you could word it as. But just kind
Okay.
of seeing where things sit for them, retirement wise. And like he said, stepping back without stepping away. He still wants to come out and help. We'll be happy to have him to come out and help. But just knowing like how that process will start.
Right. Your children are very close in age to my grandkids. So my granddaughter is 8, the second one is 7, and my grandson is turning 6 next in 6 weeks. So I can just imagine all the energy and fun and time spent also just letting them have the joy of being part of the farming operation and keeping them safe at the same time, which is always job one. What is it that you hope for your family's future, Jenny, that keeps you balancing these many different roles? Because another thing, just by listening to you on other podcasts, is you do a lot of showing of the sheep, right? You show the sheep and your sister is involved with the livestock. You're involved with the row cropping. Your dad, is running things and your mom is spending a lot of time with helping you with childcare when kids
Mhm.
aren't in school and whatnot. What is it that, you need to help you be clear about what's the most important role that you're invested in? Like, how do you find out or how do you stay well in balancing and balancing isn't really the right word. It's more like buoyancy and resilience. How do you pick your lane as to what role gets the most attention right now?
That's not even a question, I guess. I mean, motherhood is the most important role that I have. And, my off the farm job and my on the farm job will always come second. There's
Okay.
definitely, I think being a woman in as heavily involved in agriculture as I am, there might be times where a male in agriculture can miss something with the kids just because the farming has to take priority. And we've had that happen within our family before, and we all understand the heart of where that comes from. But there are times that the farming has to take pause for me to be a mom. And that's
Yeah.
something that I'm willing to change right now, that I don't need to change right now because I do have such a supportive village. I have a husband that'll step into the tractor so that I can go to a dance recital and, we can just kind of move things around as things have to go. But the farming will always be there as long as we steward it correctly. But my children won't always be this age forever. So just
Yes.
know that
Yeah.
cultivating those relationships is really important.
And I'm feeling the same as a grandmother, right? The precious time of reading stories together and making cardboard soldier outfits and painting and all the fun things that you can do. There's a book that maybe the listeners would like to get. It's called 18 Summers. And the premise of the book is you really only have 18 summers with each child, and then when they're 18, they launch into other summer jobs and doing other things. So it also puts things into perspective as by when do you plan for this to happen if you miss the opportunity and don't stay present now. And I know that you've gotten or can get pushback, Jenny, on your social media as to how people watch how you're doing life as a young farm partner and a mother of three little girls. But that's your life and that those are the priorities that you've chosen. And like you say, you have a village around you and everybody, I would say, in the Weg family is pretty much aligned with
Mhm.
with what the priorities are and what the values are that you have. And I know that there's criticism a lot of farm men for not showing up at the dance recital and not doing this and not doing that. And I don't think that that's fair if the spirit in the family is we are present for you, we love you, and we are here um, for all the important things, and we will do the best to navigate all the other demands on the family's time. How about back to the theme that we were talking about earlier too, about where do you think um, or how do you see it in your peer group, I guess, because you came to speak on the panel that Farm Credit was sponsoring the Women in Ag conference, and then you also came to the Prairie Farm Family Business meeting. So you've been to many different ag conferences. Where do you see the seeds of discontent being sown with your peer group, with other farm women who may reach out to you on Instagram and saying, it's not fair. I'm not being seen. I'm not being heard. My work is not being valued. What would be your encouragement to farm women who are not happy with their current scenario and feel like other people are grabbing or being greedy for things that they don't deserve or haven't earned?
I think the biggest thing is that communication piece. So many of us just we're bitter about something, but we don't ever want to speak up and say how we actually feel.
Mhm.
And, whether that is voicing that to your husband, whether it's voicing it to the members that are involved in the farming, there's a chance they don't even know that you feel that way. And so it's really not fair to put it onto them that they aren't, you know, giving you what you feel you need out of the situation when they don't even know what that need is. It's kind of that expectation that you can't fulfill. And so just kind of really recognizing that and then also understanding that you can't compare apples to apples. I don't know a single farm corporation, farm family,
Mhm.
farm entity that is the exact same people with the exact same needs and with the exact same resources. Like everything is so subjective. So knowing that from the outside looking in, something might look really great or really wonderful, and just to know that, everybody has these things. It's just a part of life. And so knowing that, if you can just find a way to voice those and work them out within your family, I think the relationships should always come before any of the business side of it. And knowing that at the end of the day, you are family and those things should be prioritized.
Well, and I think you mentioned before, what are the things that we all share in common? And in conflict resolution, we call those a common interests. And obviously, in the Weg family, relationship trumps everything else, right? You want to be rich towards God because of your faith, and you also want to be rich in relationship.
Mhm.
And thankfully, with your dad's illness, you were given the second chance to be able to have some of those courageous conversations to put a more detailed plan in place, which also now has timelines. So, just a shout out to our listeners, a very powerful question is, by when will this be done? By
Mhm.
when? It's 2 words, but putting dates on the calendar for you to have a family meeting, to start having even a gathering together to talk about the big picture for your family, vision for how you want to show up as family, but also the vision for how you want to show up in the farm business would be really, really helpful. So, Jenny, what's next for you?
That is a kind of loaded question. So much of what's next for us is really unknown right now, as this is such a transitional
Okay.
season for us. But I
Mhm.
think what's next for us is just proper planning and, like you said, being patient and waiting to see what things look like for us in the future. Um, and having that cash reserve ready for whenever the opportunity does present itself.
And also being really good with your personal debt, I think, as well, right? The debt that you're willing to take on has to be good debt. So, Jenny, thanks you so much for coming today. It's great to see you again. And what's the best way for people to interact with you on your Instagram? You also had, I was also curious because of your digital marketing expertise, you're a big fan of Pinterest. So, where can people find you?
I share most of our day-to-day farming things on Instagram and on Facebook. Those are the 2 places people can find me. If you are a business and you're looking to advertise, I highly suggest you get onto Pinterest.
Interesting because you said it's a magnificent search engine
It
beyond
is.
just looking for good craft ideas.
Yep.
Okay. Who knew? That was news to me. I had no idea. Well, folks, we've had a good time this morning in our conversation. And whether you're listening to this morning, noon, or night while you're feeding cows or maybe going up and down the fields putting fertilizer on, we're just really glad that you joined us. And I think the essence of our conversation, and I'll just give Jenny one more chance, of all the things that we've talked about today, Jenny, what do you want young farm families to hear the most?
I would say just don't try to keep up with the Joneses, stay in your lane,
Mm.
do the best that you can, and know that at the end of the day, what things look like on the outside aren't always what they are on the inside.
And the Irish have a saying in that vein, every front door looks beautiful. And you never really know what it's like and going on in the internal dynamic of that family until you get through the front door. But of course, in agriculture, we know no one uses the front door. Typically, everyone parks at the back and comes through the back door. So whether
But
it's the back door or the front door, I really hope that you've picked up some golden nuggets here today. If you've got young children, start putting some saving devices in place for them. In Canada, make use of your tax-free savings account and your registered education savings plan, and reach out to Jenny on her Instagram account to learn more about how she's doing financial saving for her kids. And again, folks, it's your farm, it's your family, it's your choice, and it won't kill you to talk about money, and it won't kill you to get your family together to talk about some of those undiscussables. So thank you for spending time with us today. We hope you'll share this far and wide with your family and your friends, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.